We have tried as hard as we could in the midst of our economic crisis to remember those who don't have a voice but are hardest hit by it. But unfortunately, we've also made some decisions that you will raise today and which you raise right and on the merit of the issues. I'm telling you in advance, you are right. We have, in my administration, in just under 2 years, cut $4.5 billion from health care. We've cut $1.1 billion from education. We've cut our administration, our agencies, by $1.5 billion. And in this year's budget, we're going to cut it some more, unfortunately. We're going to have to cut health care another $1 billion, education a 5% reduction at $1.1 billion, and another $1 billion from our agencies, including $250 million from workforce reduction. We are going to make cuts that if you told me years ago that I was going to be governor and I'd be making those kind of cuts, I probably wouldn't have believed either. But the reality is that there are pieces of legislation I introduced that I've had to veto because we don't have the money. And what I came here to tell you today is that we are crossing that Rubicon between recession and something else far worse if my colleagues in the legislature and I can't close a $9.2 billion deficit. Now, we had an $18 billion deficit that we closed last year, but we had more options. We have used them up. We've depleted our resources, and I came here to tell you that. That isn't popular, but it is the truth, and I wanted you to know. We will be open-minded because this is such a prohibitive situation that your suggestions may help us. We are willing to be flexible. The catalyst for our next generation's progress is in our public higher educational systems. We don't want to reduce them, and yet we've had to again. But that doesn't make fiscal sense, and yet we have to do it because we're up against the possibility of the state running out of money in May or June. I have been in this position for 2 years. Recently, I've been the target of rumors and innuendo, but it hasn't stopped. Recently, I've been also the target of special interest commercials, $8 million of them, but it hasn't stopped. And I've also been the target of a lawsuit when I took an action to prevent the state from running out of money last December, but that hasn't stopped. It hasn't stopped me from getting up 2 months into my administration and announcing that we had the devastating fiscal problems that we actually do. It didn't stop me from introducing my budget 5 weeks early last year to try to alert the public that we had to address this problem. It didn't stop me from breaking 200 years of uncertainty and appointing a lieutenant governor to stop the problem in the Senate last summer that was inhibiting government. And it didn't stop me from closing $33 billion worth of deficit over the last 2 years. The real victims here are those who unfortunately are having to suffer because we didn't make the responsible decisions years ago. And so many are going to have to pay the price that poor judgment could not alleviate years ago. Instead, what we did is we papered over deficits. We squandered surpluses. We engaged in irresponsible projections of revenues and financed unsustainable spending increases. Look at the results. We're coming to grips with the problem, and we're bringing it right back to you, the public, who has a right to know. I welcome all of your questions. We will not only appreciate, but will research some of your suggestions. I know I can tell you in advance that at least 4 people will get up to say, Governor, I know how difficult this crisis is, but here's where we need to spend more money. You can do that, because this is an open forum. But remember, in the end, we're up against the wall. We are living on the margins of our means, and anything you suggest, we have to find a way to take it from someplace else to make it happen. But I welcome your questions, and I can't thank all of you enough for taking out time come to this town meeting right here, where I grew up, in Brooklyn.
I know the borough president would disagree, but if you want to push out monies for this arena, I'm sure they would love it in New Jersey. As you know, I do not support it, and I do believe that it is a waste of taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Ask you to spend more money. I'm going to ask you about why we're not cutting. Why, in this time of budget crisis, is your administration allowing $2 to $3 billion in no-bid subsidy to go unrecaptured to the Atlantic Yards boondoggle? And why is your administration playing along with the use of a money-losing sports arena as a distraction from the governance issues inherent at what is at heart a mega monopoly land grab, the kind of one developer, 30 acres, the kind of eminent domain abuse that you previously opposed?
To be honest with you, Mr. White, I cannot tell you, based on the case, why the Court of Appeals ruled the way they actually ruled. Since the project was already in implementation when I came into office, I waited for the Court of Appeals to make a decision, and they ruled the way they did. Now, there are always, and the Supreme Court just in the last week has ruled in favor of the project as well. Now, the merits of your argument are certainly, this has been a debate on both sides. There are people who live in this area who are on both sides of this issue. So what I'm just trying to tell you is there was a process. The process did not work out. 10 years from now, either they will be right or you will be right. And what I didn't want to do was to impose my own judgment where there has already been a court decision on the issue. I want to thank all of you for bringing these questions here. There is a lot of anger as the public is waking up to the fact that government either misled the public or just did not give a fair accounting of what is going on. This is across the board. And what we're trying to do in our administration is to be blunt about the situation as it stands and to be forthright with information that hopefully will give you the resources to help guide us. We got an interesting question on the KIN program today, which we're going to look into. We got a couple of questions that might actually lead to policy changes as a result of your intervention as citizens. We want to try to restore your trust in government. We want you to believe that when the government tells you something, it's true. And we also want you to believe that when you address government, that there'll be a response. We will respond to all of you individually, and thank you so much for coming.
By creating a new subsidiary with representation from local elected officials and with actually a full-time staff to oversee the project like nearly every other real estate development in the city of New York.
Well, he didn't really answer your question, but I think the question...
Well, I just now raised the issue with him.
And what did he say?
He said he said that's an idea, but it's an idea that should have been, you know, the ESDC has been a mess with Atlantic Yards. They don't have any full-time staff except for
Do you think he can address your concern and other concerns while all this other stuff is going on?
That's a really good question. This is a reform question. What we're asking about, he's saying that he's fighting against vested interests. We're pushing against him and the reason why everyone's being so aggressive against him is because he's trying to do things that people don't want. Well, the bottom line is this is a reform question. This is something that he can do to bring accountability to government and accountability to the public of government, and transparency for the public.
Did you like this governor or not?
Or like the governor? Yeah. I want him to prove something to me. It's not enough just to say, well, something happened and now we can't do anything about it. He actually has the power to do something about it, so we ought to do something.
What's your name?
Peter Crashes.